The neighbor pepper-sprayed Ronda Rousey's daughter in the face, trying to show who's in charge in their neighborhood. He had no idea how badly it would end for him. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching this video from. The morning sunlight drifted across the polished floorboards of the small California home, painting thin gold lines along the walls and settling softly on the crib where baby Ava Rose slept. Her breath came in delicate sighs, her fists balled under her chin, her eyelids trembling in the fragile rhythm of newborn dreams. Ronda stood nearby, motionless for a moment, just listening to the sound. That tiny, even breathing that could erase a lifetime of noise. The house smelled faintly of lavender and warm milk. The kettle clicked off in the kitchen, a reminder of the world outside this cocoon. Ronda poured herself a cup of coffee, black and strong, and leaned against the counter, glancing at the calendar taped to the refrigerator. Training at 8, groceries at 10, call with her sponsor at noon. Everything in her life was scheduled now, broken into careful compartments so that she could balance being both fighter and mother. But balance was always temporary. Her coach liked to say that equilibrium is a moment between storms. Ava began to fuss, a soft sound, more sigh than cry, and Ronda was already moving. She lifted her daughter, adjusting the blanket, whispering nothing in particular, only the rhythm of comfort. Ava's tiny fingers brushed her mother's collarbone, and Ronda smiled. Even in exhaustion, she felt whole. Later in the gym, the world was different. There, the scent of milk and lavender was replaced by sweat and disinfectant. The weight of her daughter replaced by leather gloves and resistance. The heavy bag swayed like a pendulum in front of her. Each strike had a rhythm, each exhale a release. She wasn't fighting anyone. She was maintaining herself, staying sharp, keeping discipline. Every motion had purpose. Every breath was training for control. She'd learned that control was what separated violence from mastery. When the session ended, Ronda wrapped her hands, wiped her face with a towel, and stared at her reflection in the mirror. The reflection stared back, eyes still fierce, still determined, but softer now, framed by the knowledge that someone depended entirely on her. She wasn't just fighting to stay relevant, she was fighting to stay steady. Driving home, she passed through Maplewood Estates, the quiet suburban neighborhood where she and her husband had moved after Ava was born. Neat lawns, pastel mailboxes, garden flags that fluttered with quotes about family and peace. It looked perfect, but Ronda had always distrusted perfection. Every controlled surface hid something beneath it. She parked in her driveway, carried the training bag inside, and was greeted by the scent of baby lotion and the faint rhythmic hum of the dryer. That evening, she took Ava out for a walk in the stroller, a short route down the tree-lined sidewalks and back. The sun was low, the air warm with the residue of the day. A couple of neighbors waved, a few smiled. One of them didn't. He stood near the corner house, trimming the edge of his lawn with deliberate precision. He was older, maybe late 50s, tall but beginning to stoop, his arms lined with the tan of someone who spent too much time measuring his property line. His name was Harold, though most people in the community referred to him as Mr. Dyer, always with that careful tone that masked dislike. Ronda had only spoken to him twice before, both times about parking spots. He had a way of making every conversation sound like a reprimand. She nodded politely as she passed. His eyes flicked from her to the stroller, then back to the hedge he was trimming. The sound of the trimmer stopped, replaced by the quiet rasp of his voice. "Sidewalk's narrow there," he said, not looking up. "You're blocking it." Ronda paused, turned slightly. "Just walking by. There's plenty of room." He didn't answer. The trimmer buzzed again. The tone wasn't a warning. It was a reminder, a statement of authority. She pushed the stroller forward and kept walking, her pulse a little quicker than before. Ava yawned and dozed again. At home, she tried to shake it off. Every neighborhood had one. The self-appointed guardian of order, the man who thought property lines were holy scripture. It wasn't worth worrying about. But that night, when she was washing bottles in the sink, she noticed something odd, a folded flyer stuck under the front door. "Please remember HOA Rule 17. Obstructions of sidewalks, driveways, or community paths are subject to fines." At the bottom, in tidy printed letters, Residents are expected to set an example. No signature, but she didn't need one. The next morning, one of the stroller tires was flat. Not shredded, just neatly punctured. A single hole like a nail had been pressed into it. Rhonda crouched in the driveway, examining it under the sunlight. A small scrape of gray metal on the rubber edge caught her eye. A tool mark, maybe. She fixed the tire herself, refusing to give the act more power by speaking it aloud. Still, when she glanced toward Harold's yard, his blinds were half open. That afternoon, she emailed the Homeowners Association, attaching a polite inquiry. Possible vandalism, she wrote. The reply came 2 hours later, curt and impersonal. We'll look into it. Nothing since. That night she couldn't sleep. The baby monitor hummed with static. Ava's soft breathing came through in uneven waves, and outside the wind brushed against the siding. A sound at the gate made her freeze. Just a tap, then silence. She rose, walked to the window, peered through the blinds. The yard looked calm under the motion light. The bushes moved slightly, but that could have been the wind. Still, her pulse didn't slow for a long time. In the morning, another note waited on the door. Loud noises after 9 p.m. are prohibited. There had been none. She checked the timestamps on her cameras. The footage was uneventful. But on the outer edge of the frame, a shadow moved. A shoulder, a jacket sleeve. The rhythm of her days changed after that. Each walk became shorter. Each evening, she double-checked the locks, turned on the cameras, saved every recording to a hard drive. She didn't talk about it, not even to her husband, who worked late shifts and thought the neighborhood was a safe, quiet place. But Rhonda's instincts, those same instincts that told her when a punch was coming before it landed, whispered something else. Safety wasn't quiet. It was the silence that came before a scream. When she trained now, her strikes felt sharper, more purposeful. Every punch landed with the weight of something unspoken. She found herself thinking not of her opponents but of Harold, of his measured calm, his little smirk, the way he looked at her like she was a problem to solve. On a Sunday morning, she took Ava out again, determined to reclaim normalcy. The neighborhood was sleepy, the air warm, the world harmless. She pushed the stroller past Harold's house, eyes straight ahead. The sound of a lawnmower buzzed faintly somewhere behind her. A sprinkler hissed. Ava gurgled softly, amused by the sunlight flickering through the trees. Then as Rhonda reached the corner, she noticed something new. A plastic sign on a metal spike, freshly planted in the grass. No obstructions. Keep paths clear. HOA Regulation 17A. The ink was still glossy. It faced the street like a personal warning. Her stomach twisted. Not fear, anger, the kind that coils low and steady, waiting. She turned the stroller back toward home, breathing through her teeth. She wouldn't let this escalate. Not yet. That evening, she found herself scrolling through the HOA's community app, where residents posted updates and complaints. Most were trivial, missing packages, noisy dogs, parking disputes. But then she saw a new post under Harold's name. Some people think the rules don't apply to them. Even mothers, especially mothers. The comments below were mixed, a few agreeing, a few confused, but none naming her directly. Still, she knew. She turned off the phone and looked at Ava, asleep in her bassinet, a faint smile on the baby's lips. The world didn't deserve her innocence. Rhonda felt something tighten in her chest. Not rage, not yet, but a quiet, steady resolve. She'd fought her whole life to earn respect in rings full of men who doubted her. But this was different. This was her home, her child. That night she stood on the porch after midnight, a mug of tea cooling in her hands. The sky was dark, the air still. Somewhere a dog barked twice and stopped. Her eyes caught a flicker near the hedge, the faint glow of a cigarette ember. She stared until it moved, the ember dropping, the silhouette turning away toward the corner house. The gate creaked softly. Rhonda didn't move. She just watched, and as the darkness swallowed the figure, she whispered to herself, "I see you." Then she turned, went inside and locked the door. Inside, Ava stirred but didn't cry. Rhonda stood by the crib, her reflection doubled in the window, the fighter and the mother. one steady, one trembling. The house was still, but something in her bones told her the calm wouldn't last. Somewhere across the fence, a man who despised strong women was winding his own sense of power tighter and tighter, mistaking control for safety, mistaking intimidation for order. And when he crossed the line, when he finally acted on that festering hate, she would be there to meet him. The next morning began like any other. The faint light through the blinds, the soft rustle of Ava waking, the smell of coffee and warm cereal. Yet under the quiet hum of the house, a new current flowed. The storm hadn't come yet, but the air already knew. The morning after the cigarette ember glowed and vanished into Harold Dyer's hedge, Rhonda woke with the sense that the world outside her window had shifted by an inch. Not enough to see, but enough to feel. The silence felt tighter, as if the air itself were listening. Ava lay sleeping beside her, wrapped like a cocoon, her little chest rising and falling against the soft hum of the baby monitor. Rhonda's mind refused to quiet. Even in rest, her body was alert, conditioned by years in the cage to wake at the slightest disturbance. She made coffee, its bitter scent curling into the air, and stared out at the street. Everything looked ordinary. The mail truck passed, sprinklers spun on the neighboring lawns, and a couple jogged past her driveway. But when her eyes found the edge of Harold's yard, she saw something new. A yellow stake stood near the boundary line, a thin flag at the top flickering in the breeze. At first, she thought it was a marker for landscaping, until she noticed the lettering printed along its side. Property monitored for violations. HOA authorized. It hadn't been there yesterday. Harold was standing a few feet away, holding pruning shears, pretending not to see her. Rhonda's jaw tightened. She wanted to walk over, to ask him why, to remind him that this was a neighborhood, not a battlefield. But Ava stirred in the crib behind her, and the sound anchored her like a hand on her shoulder. She turned away, took another sip of coffee, and decided not to give him the satisfaction. By mid-morning, the mail came. Inside the pile of envelopes was one marked Maplewood Estates HOA. She opened it at the counter, expecting another newsletter. Instead, she found a warning notice. Complaint received regarding sidewalk obstruction. Residents are reminded to keep all walkways clear at all times. Repeated infractions may incur fines. Beneath the printed words was a handwritten note. Not official, not signed, but unmistakable. Some people need to learn the rules before someone gets hurt. Her pulse quickened. The handwriting was small and careful, written with deliberate pressure. She folded the paper, slid it back into the envelope, and set it on the table beside her phone. For a long time, she didn't move. That afternoon, while Ava napped, Rhonda called the HOA office. A polite woman named Carol answered, her voice distant and professional, like someone already tired of complaints. "We received your notice," Rhonda began, choosing her words carefully. "It's baseless. There was no obstruction. I'd like to know who filed it." "I'm afraid we can't disclose that information," Carol replied, the way people say a line they've said 100 times before. "All reports are confidential. But you can tell me if it was Harold Dyer, can't you?" A pause. "Ma'am, we can't confirm names." Rhonda exhaled through her nose, forcing calm. "Fine. Then consider this an official counterstatement, and please note that I've been receiving anonymous notes that border on harassment." "We'll log that," Carol said, though her tone made it clear she wouldn't. "Anything else I can help you with?" "No," Rhonda said. "You already have." She hung up. When her husband came home later that evening, she said nothing. He was exhausted from a double shift, shoulders slumped, eyes dull from the road. He wouldn't understand. Not yet. To him, this would sound like another neighborly misunderstanding. But Rhonda could feel the pattern forming. She'd seen it in fighters before. Men who needed to prove control, who mistook compliance for respect. They didn't stop until they were forced to. The next few days brought small changes, each one invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for them. Someone moved the trash bins a few feet from their usual place. A small rock appeared on the porch step, one of those landscaping stones Harold used to line his driveway. One morning, she found the motion sensor near the gate turned slightly toward the wall, as if someone had brushed it deliberately out of view. It wasn't vandalism. It was pressure. Ava began to sense it too. She cried more often, startled at the smallest noises, the slam of a cupboard, the bark of a distant dog. During walks, she squirmed in her stroller, as if feeling something in the air that her mother couldn't see. One evening, Rhonda was on the porch when Harold walked by, leash in hand though no dog trailed him. He didn't glance her way, but as he passed, he said softly, "Rules keep people safe, you know. Without them, everything falls apart." Then he kept walking, the leash swinging empty. She stared after him, the words burning in her chest. For a moment, she imagined stepping down the porch, confronting him right there. But she stayed still. Her control wasn't weakness. It was the rope she held onto, the one that kept her from falling into his chaos. That night, she printed out every note, every email, every piece of HOA correspondence, and placed them in a folder marked with the date. She was building her own record, her own defense. Still, the thought of Harold's voice lingered. Without rules, everything falls apart. A storm rolled in the next morning. Thick clouds, low thunder. The rain came steady and cold, washing the air of its artificial calm. Rhonda stood by the window, watching the drops race down the glass. Ava slept on her shoulder, her tiny breasts warm against Rhonda's neck. For a moment, the world felt clean again, but then she saw Harold outside, wearing a raincoat, standing by his mailbox. He wasn't checking it. He was just standing, facing her house. His posture was casual, but his stillness made her stomach turn. She raised her phone, pretending to check messages, and snapped a photo. He turned away slowly and walked back up his driveway. That evening, another flyer appeared. It wasn't left under the door this time. It was taped directly to her mailbox. Noise complaint filed. Repeated disturbances will not be tolerated. HOA enforcement pending. The edges were wet from rain. Rhonda tore it down, crumpled it in her hand, and threw it in the trash. "You picked the wrong person," she muttered. 2 nights later, she woke to the sound of her doorbell. 2:13 a.m. The house was dark except for the soft glow of the baby monitor. She froze for a second, listening. No footsteps, no movement. Just the doorbell again. One short press. She took the flashlight from the nightstand and walked to the window, careful not to make noise. The porch was empty, but the motion light was on. She checked the camera feed on her phone. There was only static, white flickering snow across the screen. The connection had been cut. Her heart pounded. She went to the front door, peered through the peephole. Nothing. When she stepped outside the next morning, she saw what had triggered the sensor. Someone had left a small object on the welcome mat. A doll, plastic and cracked, its face smeared with something dark. Its left eye had been burned with a cigarette. The police came after she called them, polite but perfunctory. The younger officer took notes. The older one examined the doll with latex gloves. "Could be a prank," he said. "Kids sometimes do weird things." Rhonda's stare was flat. Kids don't burn plastic with precision. They promised to make a report. She knew what that meant. A folder somewhere, forgotten. When they left, the house felt smaller. That afternoon, she took Ava for a walk again, this time with her phone camera on. The stroller rolled quietly along the damp pavement. At the corner, Harold was back, trimming his hedge as if the rain had never fallen. She stopped several feet away, heart thudding. "Morning," she said evenly. He turned, met her eyes, and smiled, a thin, humorless curl of lips. "Morning. Hope you slept well." She didn't answer. Ava began to fuss, and Rhonda bent down, adjusting the blanket around her. When she looked up again, Harold was holding his phone, snapping a picture. "You might want to keep the noise down," he said. "Babies cry. Neighbors complain." That night, Rhonda couldn't sit still. She paced the living room, her mind replaying every word, every threat disguised as civility. She opened her laptop and began documenting everything. Times, dates, photos, copies of every note. She even attached screenshots of Harold's social media posts where he ranted about entitled women who think motherhood gives them immunity. When she finished, she printed the file and locked it in the desk drawer. Her hand trembled only once when she wrote the title across the folder, Incident Log Dire. The air grew heavier as the days went on. Each evening brought new noises outside. Soft scraping, distant thuds, lights flickering without reason. Rhonda started sleeping in intervals, trained half by fear, half by habit. The cameras recorded silhouettes that vanished when zoomed in, shadows that seemed to know where the lens was. And then one morning, she found a message scrawled in chalk across her driveway. Control your noise or someone else will. She washed it away with the hose, her hands steady but her chest tight. Ava watched from her high chair by the window, smiling, oblivious to the tension around her. Rhonda forced herself to smile back. It's okay, baby, she whispered. It's okay. But it wasn't. Later that week, she met Carol from the HOA in person at the association office. The walls were lined with photographs of happy families at barbecues and picnics, all smiling under the same Maplewood banner. Rhonda placed the folder on the desk between them. These are threats, she said. You have a resident using HOA authority as a weapon. Carol adjusted her glasses. Mrs. Rousey, we take all complaints seriously, but it's difficult to intervene in personal disputes. This isn't personal, it's harassment. My child's afraid of her own yard. Carol's expression softened, but her words stayed careful. I'll pass this on to the board. Rhonda leaned closer. Do that, and tell them if they don't act, I will. That night, the neighborhood was too quiet. Even the crickets seemed to hold their breath. Rhonda sat by the window, watching the empty street, waiting for something to move. It was past midnight when the sprinkler system flicked on automatically, mist rising through the lawn lights. The sound made her heart leap before logic caught up. She stood, exhaling slowly. Then she saw it, a shape beyond the mist, faint, crouched near the hedge. Her first instinct was to run for the phone, but her body was already moving toward the door. By the time she reached the porch, the figure was gone. The gate latch swayed gently, tapping the post. She walked out barefoot into the cold grass, scanning the shadows. At her feet, a crushed patch of soil led toward Harold's yard. She followed it with her eyes, then turned back inside, locking the door behind her. By dawn, she knew what was coming. People like Harold didn't stop. They escalated until they believed the world finally bent to them. He had already declared a silent war. The next strike wouldn't be a note or a sign or a word. It would be something meant to hurt. When the sun rose, Rhonda fed Ava, humming softly to steady her own heartbeat. Outside, the air felt too still again, the kind of stillness that exists right before something breaks. The morning broke with the false promise of peace. The sunlight poured through the blinds, washing the nursery in gold, and for a brief moment it looked as if everything terrible had been nothing more than a dream. Rhonda stood over Ava's crib, watching her daughter's slow, contented breathing. The world outside was still. The lawn glistened with dew. It almost felt safe. She made herself believe it, if only for the length of a breath. She fed Ava, sang softly under her breath, and when the baby's eyes grew heavy, she kissed her forehead and whispered that everything was going to be all right. But in the back of her mind, the voice of instinct, that old, quiet voice she'd learned never to ignore, told her something different. It said danger was patient. It said calm was only a disguise. Her husband left early for work, and the house fell into silence again. Rhonda cleaned bottles, wiped the counters, tried to lose herself in the rhythm of domestic order. She told herself that if she could just keep the day ordinary, it might stay that way. But when she looked out the kitchen window, her stomach tightened. Harold was there again, standing by the hedge between their properties, wearing his gray jacket and gardening gloves. He wasn't gardening. He wasn't doing anything. He was just watching her. She met his eyes through the glass, and for the first time he smiled. Not a big, mocking grin, just the faintest curl of amusement, as if he knew something she didn't. Then he turned, disappeared behind his fence, and she heard the click of his gate closing. Rhonda stepped away from the window. She couldn't let him make her afraid in her own home. She took Ava for a drive to the park, the baby bundled in a blanket, the stroller in the back seat. The day was bright and almost unnervingly beautiful. The trees swayed in soft rhythm, families played frisbee in the distance, and Ava giggled as Rhonda pushed her gently along the walking path. For the first time in weeks, Rhonda let her shoulders relax. Maybe this would pass. Maybe Harold would lose interest. But as she walked back to the car, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. On the side of the stroller, near the wheel, was a small smear of orange residue, faint but distinct. She rubbed it with her thumb. It was sticky, chemical, familiar. She had smelled that before, in self-defense classes, in police demonstrations. Pepper spray. Her heart dropped. She scanned the parking lot, but no one was there. Only the wind and the sound of children playing far away. She lifted Ava from the stroller and checked her carefully, heart pounding. The baby was fine, her eyes bright, her breathing even. The spray must have dried, or it had been only a trace. Still, the realization made Rhonda's skin crawl. Someone had touched her stroller. When she got home, she washed the stroller, scrubbed every inch until the faint smell of chemicals was gone. She documented it, photos, timestamps, everything. She emailed the HOA again. No reply. That evening, when the house was quiet, she sat on the porch and waited. The air was cooling, the sky shifting from gold to violet. She wasn't sure what she expected to see. Maybe nothing. But she needed to know. The first sound was subtle, a faint metallic rattle, like a latch being nudged. She tensed, her body reacting before her mind did. Then she heard it again, closer this time. The baby monitor crackled faintly from the living room, the white noise of Ava's breathing a thin lifeline in the dark. Rhonda stepped quietly to the edge of the porch. The street was empty. The only movement was the slow rotation of the motion light near the gate. She waited. Then the smell hit her, sharp, acidic, like metal and burning spice. Pepper spray. She spun around and saw the faint glint of a canister through the hedge. The hiss came next. Short, violent, unmistakable. A burst of orange mist spilled into the air, carried by the faint breeze toward her porch. Rhonda gasped, choking on the taste before she covered her face with her sleeve. She bolted for the door, slammed it shut, and turned toward the living room, and froze. The monitor was shrieking. Ava was crying. "No!" she whispered, running. The air inside was tainted, not much but enough. The spray had seeped through the small gap near the front door. Ava's cries turned from startled to terrified, raw and high-pitched. Rhonda snatched her daughter from the crib, eyes watering from the burn in the air. "It's okay, baby. It's okay," she said, voice trembling. The baby's cheeks were flushed, her eyes squeezed shut, tiny fists thrashing. Rhonda ran to the sink, turned on the tap, and wet a clean cloth, gently wiping Ava's face. She knew not to rub, knew not to panic, but the mother in her screamed louder than reason. The baby coughed, her breath hitching into quick, shallow gasps. "Breathe, baby, breathe," Rhonda said, her hands shaking. She pulled open the back door for air, ran into the yard, clutching her daughter against her chest. Ava's cries weakened, became small, ragged whimpers. The sirens came only after she'd already called 911, her voice breaking as she described what had happened. The operator told her to keep the baby calm, to avoid water in the eyes, to wait for the medics. Rhonda's knees hit the grass, her body trembling with fury and fear. "She's 3 months old," she whispered. "He sprayed my baby." The paramedics arrived fast, their calm professionalism cutting through the chaos. One of them took Ava, placing a tiny oxygen mask over her face, murmuring to the other as they worked. "Mild chemical exposure, possible airway irritation. Keep the airway open." Rhonda wanted to scream, to break something, to tear through the hedge with her bare hands, but she forced herself to stand still. She had to be the steady one. A police car pulled up next, lights flashing silently against the houses. The officer approached, cautious but alert. "Ma'am, did you see who did this?" "Yes," Rhonda said, her voice low, steady, dangerous. "My neighbor, Harold Dyer. He's been harassing us for weeks." The officer took notes, called something into his radio, and walked to the fence. By then, Harold was already standing on his porch, arms folded, his face blank. When the officer called out, he shrugged, said something Rhonda couldn't hear. The officer looked back at her, uncertain. "We'll investigate," he said, "but unless we have direct evidence." Rhonda cut him off. "You'll have it. Check the cameras." Later that night at the hospital, Rhonda sat beside Ava's crib, the monitors beeping softly in rhythm with her baby's heart. The doctor explained what she already knew, that the exposure wasn't life-threatening, but had caused irritation to Ava's eyes and lungs. They'd watch her overnight. She'd recover, physically. But Rhonda couldn't stop replaying the image in her mind. Harold's silhouette, the faint hiss of the spray, the sound of her baby's screams. When they returned home the next day, the house felt different. The air was heavy with what had happened. The porch was still damp from the night before, and near the hedge, she saw a small metallic glint in the grass. She picked it up, a half-empty canister. The label faded, but the brand name clear. She turned it over in her palm, the metal cold against her skin. She called the police again. This time, they took it seriously. They photographed the canister, collected residue samples from the porch, asked her to describe everything in detail. When they left, promising to follow up, Rhonda sat on the porch steps, holding Ava close. The baby slept restlessly, her breath still wheezy, her face peaceful only in exhaustion. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, Rhonda stared at Harold's house. The curtains were drawn, but she could see the faint flicker of a television through the window. She imagined him inside, calm, satisfied, maybe even laughing. That thought lit something inside her. Not the wild, blind rage she'd felt before, but something colder, cleaner. She stood, walked back inside, and opened her laptop. Every note, every photo, every message. She gathered them into a single folder and titled it Evidence. She uploaded it to a cloud drive, copied it to an external disk, printed every page. She called a lawyer she'd worked with years ago, left a message describing the situation, her voice steady and precise. She called the HOA office again and demanded to speak to the board directly. They told her to calm down. She told them she was done being calm. When night came, she checked on Ava, kissed her forehead, and turned off the lights. But she didn't go to bed. She sat by the window, staring out at the hedge, waiting. The canister had been retrieved, but Harold's kind of hate didn't end with evidence. It was a sickness that fed on itself, and she could feel it growing. The hours passed. At 2 a.m, she saw movement near the streetlight, a shape crossing the sidewalk, slow and deliberate. She didn't move, didn't even breathe. The shape stopped near her driveway, lingered for a moment, then turned back toward Harold's house. Rhonda rose, her heart hammering in her chest. But her hands were steady. She walked to the crib, checked Ava once more, and whispered, "You're safe now, baby, I promise." Outside, the night swallowed the last trace of movement. The storm had finally broken. There was no turning back now. The morning after the attack carried a different kind of silence. It wasn't the peace of a neighborhood waking to birdsong and sprinklers. It was the stunned quiet that follows something unforgivable. Rhonda woke to it like a soldier coming out of a dream, her body heavy but her mind alert, cataloging every sound. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of the air conditioner, Ava's soft breathing beside her. Everything else was gone. The house no longer felt like home. It felt like evidence. Ava's face was still pink from irritation, her eyelids slightly swollen, but she was breathing normally again. Rhonda had hardly slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard that hiss, the sharp, venomous spray, and her baby's cry cutting through the night. The doctor had said she'd heal, that there would be no permanent damage, but he couldn't say what kind of scars might linger beyond the skin. Neither could Rhonda. She had learned long ago that not all wounds bleed. Some hide, waiting years to speak. When she stepped outside that morning, the air smelled of rain and pepper. The police tape fluttered across her gate like an accusation. 2 officers were still parked at the corner, their cruiser half hidden by the hedges. They nodded when she approached. "We might have something," the younger one said. "Security cameras from 2 houses down caught part of the street last night. We'll pull the footage and get back to you." "Do it fast," Rhonda said, her voice level but sharp enough to make him flinch. She looked across the street toward Harold's house. The curtains were drawn tight. His car was gone, but she knew he hadn't gone far. Back inside, she opened her laptop and began building what she'd already started the night before. A case. Every message, every photograph, every timestamp went into a single document. She listed the dates of every complaint, every letter, every shadow caught on camera. She attached the HOA's automated responses, the police reports, and even the email chains she'd had with Carol, who now seemed less like an administrator and more like a coward hiding behind procedure. The file grew by the hour. By noon, Detective Morales arrived. A tall woman in plain clothes, hair tied back, expression unreadable. She'd been assigned to the case that morning. Her handshake was firm, her tone businesslike. "I've already reviewed your statement," she said. "I want to walk through it again. In your own words. Everything? From the first incident." Ronda told her everything. The notes, the flyers, the nighttime knocks, the doll left on the porch. Morales took notes silently, occasionally nodding, occasionally asking short, pointed questions. When Ronda finished, the detective sat back, pen resting between her fingers. "You've documented everything better than most people do in these cases," she said. "That helps. But I need you to understand. We're dealing with an escalation pattern. When people like Dyer cross into violence, they rarely stop at one act. They thrive on control. If he feels cornered, he might lash out again." Ronda met her gaze. "Then corner him faster." Morales allowed herself a faint, grim smile. "That's the plan." The next day, the footage came in. Morales called her to the precinct to review it. The video was grainy, but it was enough. A figure in a gray jacket, moving along the hedge line, pausing near Ronda's gate. The timestamp matched the moment Ava's monitor had begun shrieking. The figure lifted something, a glint of metal, and a faint puff of aerosol mist shimmered under the streetlight. Even without a clear shot of his face, there was no mistaking the build, the posture, the deliberate calm of a man certain he was untouchable. "That's him," Ronda said quietly. Morales nodded. "We'll bring him in." The arrest happened that evening. Ronda watched from her porch as 2 squad cars pulled up outside Harold's house. The officers knocked. For a moment, it looked like he wouldn't answer. Then the door opened, and Harold stepped out, calm as ever, hands already raised. The neighbors gathered on their lawns, whispering. Some filmed with their phones. One of them, a woman from 2 doors down, turned to Ronda and said, "What did he even do?" Ronda didn't answer. She couldn't. She just held Ava closer, shielding her from the murmurs. When the door of the cruiser closed behind Harold, a strange quiet settled again. Not peace, but suspension, like the moment before thunder. That quiet didn't last long. By morning, the neighborhood had split in half. On the community message board, posts appeared faster than Ronda could read them. HOA president arrested, false accusations, harassment or misunderstanding, power trip gone wrong. Some defended her, others defended him. Someone even suggested that Ronda was using her fame to manipulate the system. She read it all in silence, scrolling through each poisonous comment. People she'd waved to at the park, who'd smiled at her in passing, were now debating whether her baby's suffering was exaggerated for attention. She closed the app and turned off her phone. When she looked up, Morales was standing in her doorway again. "He's been charged," the detective said. "Assault with a chemical agent, endangerment of a minor. But his lawyer's already fighting. Says he was enforcing community regulations. Claims it was self-defense." Ronda blinked. "Self-defense? Against what? A 3-month-old child?" Morales sighed. His attorney's arguing he didn't know the infant was there. Said he sprayed at the parents, not the stroller. Ronda's jaw clenched. "And you believe that?" "I don't," Morales said. "But belief and proof aren't the same thing. That's why I need everything you have." Ronda handed her the folder she'd compiled, thick with evidence. "It's all there. Dates, texts, HOA records. He planned this. He thought the rules gave him power." Morales nodded, flipping through the pages. "This is good. The DA will want copies." After the detective left, Ronda sat alone in the living room, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her. Ava slept nearby, her breathing steady. On the television, a local news anchor spoke about an altercation between neighbors in Maplewood Estates. Harold's mugshot flashed across the screen, stern, unrepentant. Beneath it, the words, "Former HOA president claims self-defense." Ronda muted the sound. By the 3rd day, the media had turned it into a spectacle. Reporters lingered near the entrance to the neighborhood. Some neighbors avoided her altogether. Others offered awkward sympathy. Carol from the HOA called once, her voice trembling with the forced calm of someone trying to distance herself. "This isn't the kind of attention we want for the community," she said. "It's not the kind of attention I wanted either." Rhonda replied coldly and hung up. Meanwhile, Morales kept digging. She found old complaints. Minor, ignored, forgotten. Harold had threatened to report a teenage boy for skateboarding, told a woman to control her mutt or he'd do it himself. There were no charges, just warnings, each one smoothed over by the HOA board. It was a pattern, small abuses disguised as order, the kind that people tolerated until they became monstrous. Rhonda also discovered that Harold had resigned from his previous homeowners committee in another town after disputes with residents. The pattern stretched back years. She sent every detail to Morales. The detective's replies grew shorter, sharper. Each new piece was a nail tightening the case, but even as the investigation strengthened, the social divide deepened. Neighbors who'd once waved from their porches now crossed the street when Rhonda passed. A few stopped replying to her messages. One morning, someone spray-painted across her fence. "Drama queen." She painted over it herself, methodically, stroke by stroke, until the words were gone. Days turned into weeks. Harold remained in custody pending trial, but the HOA refused to make a statement. "We're reviewing our policies," Carol said in a bland press release. Rhonda almost laughed when she read it. Policies, she thought. That word again. Always the same shield people hid behind when they didn't want to admit what was really happening. She kept visiting the hospital for Ava's follow-ups. The baby's lungs were healing, though she still startled easily, her tiny hands trembling at sudden noises. The pediatric specialist called it a stress imprint. Rhonda called it what it was, trauma. Every time Ava flinched, Rhonda's heart clenched too. One night, Morales called with a note of victory in her voice. "We've got his text," she said. "He messaged a friend the morning of the attack. Said he was dealing with the noise problem once and for all." That's premeditation. Combined with the footage, it's enough to bury him. Rhonda closed her eyes. Thank you. But even victory didn't bring relief. She knew too well that justice wasn't the same as peace. The hearings would take months. The damage was already done. Still, she wasn't powerless anymore. The file she had built had become more than evidence. It was her weapon, her defense, her truth. The night before the first court date, Rhonda stood by the window again, the same spot where it had all begun. The street was quiet. The hedge swayed gently in the wind. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't waiting for danger. She was preparing for justice. She looked down at Ava, asleep in her arms, her tiny fingers curled around her mother's thumb. "He doesn't win," Rhonda whispered. "Not this time." Outside, the world looked calm again, but she knew better. Calm wasn't peace. It was just the pause before the next fight. And this time, she was ready to take it all the way. The courthouse smelled of dust, old paper, and coffee gone cold. Rhonda sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped in her lap, eyes fixed straight ahead. The buzz of whispered voices around her felt distant, like she was underwater. In front of her, the seal of the state glinted above the judge's bench, solemn and impersonal. It was supposed to represent order, justice, reason, all the things Harold Dyer had twisted into cruelty. Now it was her turn to see those words mean something again. Ava was at home with her mother, safe. Rhonda had kissed her goodbye before dawn, lingering a moment longer than necessary. The house had been dark and still, the air heavy with the quiet of unfinished battles. She'd promised her daughter she would come back stronger. "Mommy's got work to do," she'd whispered. Now that promise burned in her chest. When the bailiff called the case, everyone rose. The judge, an older man with sharp eyes and a voice that carried authority even in silence, took his seat. Harold entered next, flanked by his attorney. His hair was neatly combed, his suit pressed, his expression almost serene. He didn't look at Rhonda right away, but when he did, his mouth twitched in the ghost of a smile. That same smile she'd seen through her window, the one that had haunted her nights. It made her grip the table a little tighter. The prosecutor, a woman named Denise Miller, was concise and calm, her tone edged with restrained anger. "This case," she began, "is not about property lines or HOA regulations. It's about an adult man who weaponized authority against a family, who assaulted a mother and her 3-month-old child with a chemical agent because he believed rules mattered more than lives. She paused, letting the words sink in. You'll hear from witnesses, you'll see the footage, and you'll learn that this wasn't a moment of panic. It was deliberate. It was planned. It was cruel. Harold's lawyer, Thomas Lang, rose next. His voice was smooth, almost oily. My client is a respected community member, a man who served as HOA president for 5 years without a single infraction. On the night in question, he acted under pressure. He perceived a threat, loud disturbances, repeated disregard for neighborhood safety, and responded instinctively within his rights to defend community order. This is not malice. This is misunderstanding. Ronda stared at him, barely breathing. Misunderstanding. That word again. The favorite disguise of abusers. The cloak of cowards. Ava's screams replayed in her mind. The stinging air, the burning skin, the sight of her daughter gasping. There had been no misunderstanding. There had been a choice. The first witness was Detective Morales. She testified with the precision of someone who believed in facts more than rhetoric. She described the evidence, the recovered canister, the video footage, the text message Harold had sent that morning. Some people never learn. Time to show them rules still means something. The room went silent when she read it aloud. Harold shifted in his seat. His lawyer objected, but the judge overruled. Then came Ronda's turn. She walked to the stand, steady despite the pounding of her heart. The oath felt heavy on her tongue. When she sat, the prosecutor's voice softened. Mrs. Rousey, can you tell the court what happened that night? Ronda drew in a breath, steadying herself. It started weeks before, she said. Notes on my door, false complaints, late-night noises outside my home. My daughter's stroller was vandalized. I filed reports, but no one acted. Then that night, I heard a sound by the porch, a hiss. I smelled pepper spray. I ran inside and my baby was screaming. Her voice cracked but didn't break. Her skin turned red. Her breathing changed. I thought she was dying. I called 911. The paramedics said it was chemical exposure. She paused, meeting Harold's eyes for the first time. He did that. To my child. The prosecutor stepped back, giving her space. The courtroom was silent except for the soft hum of the air vents. Ronda continued, quieter now. He didn't just hurt her body. He took away her peace. My daughter wakes screaming some nights, and she's only a baby. What kind of person does that? When it was Lang's turn to cross-examine, his tone shifted. Polite, but with the edge of accusation. Mrs. Rousey, you're a professional fighter, aren't you? Yes. You've been in violent situations before. You understand what fear can do to a person. I do. So it's possible that your neighbor, feeling intimidated. No, she interrupted, her voice cutting clean through his sentence. He wasn't afraid. He was angry. There's a difference. Lang's jaw twitched. You can't know what was in his mind. I don't have to, she said. I saw what was in his eyes. The judge didn't reprimand her. He didn't need to. The words hung in the air, heavy and certain. When the prosecution played the video, the room grew tense. The footage, though grainy, told everything. Harold moving along the hedge, pausing, raising the canister, the faint shimmer of the mist under the light. There was no sound, only the image. But that was enough. The jury watched, horrified. One of them covered her mouth. Afterward, the prosecutor showed the messages he'd sent. If the cops won't do their jobs, I'll do it myself. Babies cry because parents are weak. Each one was like a nail driven deeper. When the defense finally rested, Harold took the stand. He spoke with the same calm arrogance that had marked his years of control. I was enforcing community standard, he said. They'd been warned multiple times. The noise, the stroller blocking the sidewalk, the defiance. I carried pepper spray for protection. I didn't mean to harm the child. The prosecutor leaned forward. But you did harm her. I was upholding order, he replied almost proudly. You sprayed an infant, she said. That's not order. That's brutality. Harold's mask slipped for the first time. His composure cracked, a flash of resentment twisting his face. Someone had to do it, he snapped. People think they're above the rules. That's how chaos starts. The courtroom erupted, whispers, outrage, a gavel striking wood. Ronda watched him, her expression unreadable. For the first time she saw him clearly. Not a neighbor, not a tyrant, but a man consumed by his own small hunger for power. After closing arguments, the jury left to deliberate. Hours passed. Ronda sat with her hands folded, staring at the empty chair where Harold had sat. Morales appeared at her side briefly, offering a quiet nod. "You did good," she said. When the jury returned, the air in the courtroom thickened. The foreman, an older woman with kind eyes, stood. "We find the defendant, Harold Dyer, guilty on all counts: assault with a chemical agent, child endangerment, and premeditated harm." The gavel fell once, final and heavy. Harold didn't move. He just stared at the table in front of him, pale, expressionless, his world collapsing behind his silence. Outside, reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Ronda said nothing. Morales escorted her to the car, shielding her from the noise. Once inside, Ronda let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped for months. At home, the house was quiet again. Ava stirred in her crib, her tiny hand reaching up as if sensing her mother's return. Ronda bent over, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "It's over." But she knew it wasn't, not completely. Healing didn't begin when the sentence was read. It began when the fear stopped echoing in your bones. Still, justice was a start. The man who had tried to break her peace was behind bars, stripped of his titles, his rules, his power. Weeks later, the HOA issued a formal apology. Carol resigned. The board voted to dissolve and rebuild with new leadership. The same neighbors who'd once doubted Ronda now left flowers by her gate, notes that said, "We're sorry," or "We should have listened." She accepted them, but forgiveness wasn't something she gave lightly. The night after Harold's sentencing, she took Ava out into the backyard. The air was warm, the stars clear. The hedge that had once been a border of fear now stood quiet, harmless. Ava reached up, her small fingers catching at the night air, her eyes bright with wonder. Ronda looked down at her and smiled. "See that?" she murmured. "That's freedom, baby. That's what we fought for." In the distance, a wind stirred the trees. Not a warning this time, but something gentler. The sound of peace returning, one breath at a time. The weeks after the sentencing passed like slow tides, each day carrying a little less of the tension that had once wrapped itself around Ronda's chest. The neighborhood that had once felt like a battlefield began to return to something resembling normalcy, though the word no longer meant what it used to. Maplewood Estates was quieter now, subdued, as if ashamed of what it had allowed to fester within its manicured lawns. The hedges had grown thicker, the sidewalks were swept clean, and every house on the street looked immaculate. But beneath that surface gleam, there was a collective guilt that whispered in the spaces between mailboxes and driveways. People smiled again, but not quite the same way. Ronda spent most of her time at home with Ava, who was growing fast, laughing more, crying less, her cheeks round and pink with health. The doctors said her recovery was remarkable, though there would always be a risk of sensitivity in her lungs. Every time Ava coughed, even lightly, Ronda felt the same pang of panic deep inside her ribs. It would pass with time, she told herself, both for Ava and for her. Healing wasn't linear. Some nights she still woke up in a sweat, the echo of that hiss, that sharp, venomous spray, cutting through her dreams. But each morning she woke to sunlight, to her daughter's giggle, and that was enough to start again. The media had long since moved on. The story had made national headlines for a week, maybe two, before fading into the endless churn of outrage and forgetting. For Ronda, that was a blessing. She didn't want to be a headline anymore. She wanted to be a mother again. Still, there were letters that arrived, from strangers across the country, women who had faced their own battles with men like Harold. Some wrote of ex-husbands, some of bosses or landlords or neighbors who used authority like a weapon. "You stood up for all of us," one letter said. Ronda read them at night, sometimes with tears, sometimes with a tired smile. One afternoon, a knock came at her door. It was Carol, the former HOA administrator, holding a small box. Her posture was hesitant, her face drawn with guilt. "I wanted to return this," she said softly. The association records. I resigned after the verdict. I should have seen it sooner. Rhonda took the box, heavy with files, and set it down by the door. Seeing it wouldn't have been enough, she said evenly. You had to act. Carol nodded, her eyes wet. I know. I'm sorry, truly. Sorry doesn't undo what happened to my daughter, Rhonda said, her tone quiet, not cruel. But I hope you do better next time. Somewhere else. Carol left, her footsteps slow on the path, and for a moment Rhonda felt a flicker of pity. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something softer, a faint recognition that guilt could be its own punishment. Later that week, Detective Morales stopped by with the final report. The official language was clinical. Case closed, conviction upheld, sentence enforced. She sat with Rhonda at the kitchen table sipping coffee, the kind of silence between them that only shared experience could hold. You did everything right, Morales said finally. Rhonda looked out the window where Ava was lying on a blanket under the maple tree, batting at the leaves overhead. I did what any mother would have done, she said. Morales nodded. Maybe, but not everyone has the strength to see it through. Rhonda smiled faintly. You'd be surprised what strength you find when someone hurts your child. After Morales left, Rhonda went outside to sit beside Ava. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and sunlight. A butterfly drifted past, landing briefly on Ava's tiny hand. The baby laughed. A bright, bubbling sound that made Rhonda's chest ache in the best possible way. She hadn't heard that kind of pure joy since before the attack. She leaned back on her palms, letting the warmth of the afternoon seep into her skin, feeling for the first time in months like she wasn't bracing for something. Across the street, new neighbors were moving into Harold's old house. A young couple, cheerful, kind. They waved when they saw her, and she waved back. The woman was pregnant. The man carried boxes with exaggerated care, glancing back to make sure she didn't slip on the steps. Rhonda watched them for a long moment, feeling a mix of sadness and strange relief. That house would hold new life now, not old bitterness. The hedge between their yards had been trimmed short, sunlight spilling through it. That evening, her husband came home early for the first time in months. He found Rhonda in the backyard, Ava asleep in her arms, the twilight painting everything in gold and lavender. He knelt beside them, brushing a strand of hair from Rhonda's face. She's getting so big, he whispered. She's stronger than both of us, Rhonda said. He smiled faintly. She gets that from you. They sat together in the fading light, saying little. The world around them hummed softly, the low murmur of distant crickets, the rustle of wind through the maple leaves. Peace finally felt real, not because the pain was gone, but because they'd learned to live alongside it. A week later, Rhonda received a letter from the court. It was a notice confirming that Harold Dyer's appeal had been denied. He would serve the full term. She read it twice, folded it neatly, and tucked it into the back of the same folder that had started it all. Evidence once, closure now. That night, after putting Ava to bed, she went for a walk through the neighborhood. The streets were quiet, the windows glowing with the soft light of families winding down. She passed the spot where the first note had been left months ago, where the fear had begun. The sidewalk looked ordinary now, but she could still feel the memory of that weight, the suffocating control that had once lingered there. She paused for a moment, breathing deeply, then let it go. When she reached the corner, she saw the new sign the community had put up after the trial. Maplewood Estates, where neighbors protect neighbors. It made her smile, not because it was true yet, but because it could be. Change always started small. She turned toward home, the moonlight tracing her shadow along the pavement. As she neared her gate, she saw the porch light flick on. Motion sensor, automatic, harmless. The sound used to make her heart race. Now it only reminded her that vigilance wasn't the same as fear. She could be watchful without being haunted. Inside, Ava stirred, murmuring softly in her sleep. Rhonda leaned over the crib, smoothing a hand across her daughter's hair. You're safe, she whispered. You're free. For a long while, she just stood there, listening to the steady rhythm of her baby's breathing. It was the purest sound in the world. Proof that life continued, that love endured. Somewhere out there, Harold Dyer was sitting in a cell, surrounded by the walls he'd built for himself. Rhonda didn't need to think about him anymore. His name belonged to the past. She stepped out onto the porch one last time that night. The air was cool, the stars sharp against the velvet dark. For the first time since moving to Maplewood Estates, she wasn't afraid of what the darkness might hold. She tilted her head back, closed her eyes, and let the quiet fill her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: training, motherhood, ordinary life. But tonight was victory. Not the kind won in arenas or courts, but the kind earned in silence, through survival, through strength, through the simple act of still being here. Inside the house, Ava let out a soft sigh, and Rhonda smiled to herself. The storm that had nearly broken them had passed. What remained now was light, fragile, flickering, but real. And for the first time in a very long time, Ronda Rousey felt peace. If this story shocked you, don't just scroll away. Hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss what happens next. Share this video with someone who needs to see it and keep watching. The next story will leave you speechless.